This video is going to compare the cost difference between buying the electric versus gasoline versions of the Mini Cooper. The financials are pretty persuasive, however there may be many reasons why the electric version is not suitable for you. Everyone has their own reasons for choosing the car they drive, and they're not wrong. This video is just about the financial aspect, nothing more. So if you think the electric version would work for you, but you have a few concerns around the price or potential big bills down the line, especially if this is to be your first EV, then hopefully you'll find this video useful. This is not financial advice, however, and I would encourage you to do your own research and run your own numbers. The electric version of the Mini Cooper is known as the Mini Cooper SE. This is to signify it's an electric version of the sporty Mini Cooper S. It's available in 3 trim levels: Signature, Signature Plus and Iconic, and as with any car, the level of equipment you get goes up along with the price. We're going to look at the base trim, the Signature, as it's pretty well equipped as is. While the MSRP is below $30,000, by the time you add the mandatory destination charge, you're looking at $30,750. So what do you get for your money? Well, performance-wise, you're talking 0 to 60 in the mid 6 seconds, which is about the same as the gas car, at least in the real world. I won't run through all the features. I listed the main ones here, but the important thing to note is that all the items on this list are also present on the gas version of the car. Speaking of the gas car, at first glance it looks like it costs an extra $1,000 over the electric version, but in return you do get a glass moonroof and some slightly nicer Napa leather on the steering wheel versus the regular leather on the SE. Other than that, the cars are identical. So the electric car is not actually any more expensive than the gas version, which may be a surprise to some people who are used to hearing that electric cars cost more to buy, as that is clearly not the case here. The purchase price is only part of the story though, so as much as I liked the idea of an electric Mini, I decided to fill out a worksheet that I made to compare the true cost of both cars over several years. I decided to go with 8 years, as that's how long the battery warranty is on the electric Mini, so why not take full advantage of it? I also went with 10,000 miles per year, which is close to the number of miles the average American drives in a year and is pretty reasonable for a small car which may see less use. I put the Mini Cooper SE, the electric Mini, on the left, and the Mini Cooper S, the gasoline version, on the right. We'll bring in the MSRP numbers to start off with, which, as we already discussed, are near enough the same. The first thing to be aware of is that there is a rebate available on your federal taxes. The government is encouraging people to switch to electric vehicles, and a few years ago they passed a bill to help offset the higher price of electric vehicles versus their gasoline counterparts. Now, we can see already that the rebate isn't really needed for the Mini, at least not in purely financial terms, as there is no price penalty to buying the electric version. This rebate may be replaced in future with a different system. Under the current proposals for the Build Back Better plan, the rebate would drop to $4,000 or so, given the small size of the battery and the fact that the vehicle is not made in America. But as of the time of recording this video, it's $7,500. Now, it's important to understand that this is a rebate against your taxes. You have to pay the full price of the car when you buy it, and then you get the rebate when you do your tax return. It's also important to note that you will not receive a rebate greater than your tax liability. That means if, after you've done all your deductions and so on, you should have paid only $5,000 in taxes that year, you will only get a $5,000 rebate on the car. Obviously, there is no rebate for the gasoline car. The next thing to consider is state incentives. Some states are also encouraging people to go electric and are also offering a rebate on your state taxes, or even simply cutting you a check. The amounts vary. I've heard figures as high as $3,500, but some states have no such program. For the purposes of this example, we'll assume the buyer is in a state with no incentives. So the price you actually pay, not at the point of sale, but when you receive your rebate and so on, is just $23,250 for the electric Mini, but $31,750 for the gas version. Now that's a huge difference already, $8,500. At this point, some people would already be convinced, but stay with me as we want to look at the whole picture, including what could go wrong down the line. The next and rather obvious item we're going to look at is the cost of fueling these cars. How much fuel these cars use will depend on how you drive them. Do you have a lead foot? Do you mainly drive in the city or on the highway? Do you do a lot of uphill driving? Is it super cold where you are? I obviously can't answer those questions for you, so to make things simple, I went with the EPA numbers for the combined cycles. The gas car will get 31 miles per gallon in mixed driving according to the EPA. A little more on the highway, a little less around town, but overall 31 miles per gallon. What about the electric car? Well, the EPA does publish a figure they call MPGE, or miles per gallon equivalent. But as gas cars and gallons are going to go away, this isn't going to make much sense going forward. Tesla measure their usage as watts per mile, which, while precise, can be a little confusing when you want to start thinking about money. So we're going to go with miles per kilowatt hour, as that's the closest way of thinking to MPG. The MPG figure is how many miles can you drive on 1 unit of gasoline, the unit being a gallon. Miles per kilowatt hour is how many miles can you drive on a single unit of electricity, the unit being a kilowatt hour. When you get your electricity bill at home, you're charged by how many kilowatt hours you use, just like a gas station charges you by how many gallons you buy. The EPA says the Mini Cooper SE gets 114 miles of range on its 28.9 kilowatt hours of usable battery. So we take 114, divide by 28.9, and we get 3.94, which is as near as makes no difference 4. So in other words, we will travel 4 miles on 1 kilowatt hour of electricity. The price of electricity and gasoline varies by state, so I went with the average prices as outlined by the US Energy Information Authority and AAA at the time of writing this. On the subject of charging, I am aware that some people may not be able to charge their car at home. If you live in an apartment building in New York City, for example, and you park your car on the street a block away, you may be stuck with charging at much more expensive public fast chargers that typically charge 2.5 times what you would pay at home. However, suburban living is the dominant model in the US, and most people will be able to charge at home, so that's the situation I'm going with. As of early January 2022, the average residential price in the USA for a single kilowatt hour of electricity is 14.1 cents. The average price of a gallon of premium gasoline, which is what the turbocharged engines in gasoline minis require, is $3.95. So in the electric Mini, we go 4 miles for 14.1 cents, which means each mile we drive costs us 3.5 cents. At 31 miles per gallon in the gas car, we're looking at 12.7 cents per mile. So on average, we're saving about 70% on our fuel bill. So what does that look like over 80,000 miles? Well, the electric Mini will cost us less than $3,000 in fuel, while the gas version will cost us more than $10,000. The next item is maintenance, specifically routine maintenance. This is the standard preventative stuff you're supposed to get done at the dealer, like changing the oil and oil filter, the cabin filter, having them check under the car for problems, and so on. Mini gives you the first 3 years of this for free. And while prices vary between dealers, the number I kept seeing on forums and so on was $300. The gas car needs this every year, so if we don't count the first 3 years, and we don't count the final year, where maybe you want to sell the car before the maintenance is due, we'd need to pay for 4 years' worth at a cost of $1,200. Now, some people like to also pay for an extra oil change in between these annual services, but I'm not going to add that to the worksheet. I'm going to give the gas car every advantage I can here and assume that you don't change the oil any more than is necessary. The electric Mini only needs servicing every other year. That's because there's no oil to change and not much checking to do. There are no belts to worry about, no engine hoses, no leaky oil seals, and so on. So the first 3 years being free is not much of a deal, as that only covers one service, but we'd have to pay for years 4 and 6, and again, like the gas car, we'll ignore year 8. So that's $600. Now we start looking at wear items, mainly the brakes. Over 80,000 miles, I'd expect to have to replace the front pads twice, once with rotors and probably rear pads once as well. I suspect some people may need to change them more often than that, and the dealer might want to replace the rotors at every visit. But as the electric car won't need any of it, I don't want to make the gas car look any worse, so I'm being conservative here. What do I mean the electric Mini won't need brakes? Why wouldn't it? Well, electric cars use something called regenerative braking. This means that when you back off the gas pedal, the motor stops using power and instead turns into a generator, where the spinning wheels of the car turn it and it generates electricity which gets put back into the battery. This is why the range on electric cars is so good around town. That constant slowing for red lights and so on results in a good chunk of charging. Another side effect of this is that the motor creates a lot of drag while doing it, which slows down the car, in essence acting as a brake. The driver can control how much braking they get depending how far they back off the gas pedal, or whatever we're calling it these days. But apart from in emergencies or any other last-minute braking situation, you never use your regular friction brakes. This means you don't wear them down. There are electric cars out there with well over 100,000 miles on the clock that have never needed a brake job. The next two items are only needed every 60,000 miles on the gasoline Mini, which is replacing the spark plugs and the serpentine accessory belts. The engine uses a timing chain rather than timing belts, so at least there's no need to worry about that, as that would be quite a big bill. All in, you can see that simple, regular maintenance over 80,000 miles is quite a bit more expensive on the gas car versus the electric one. And we're not considering anything else that can leak, wear out, or otherwise fail in the hundreds of moving parts in the engine and transmission. Bear in mind, there's only one moving part in an electric motor. So if we add up everything so far, buying the car, fueling it, and just service items, we're looking at a saving of around $18,500 for the electric Mini over a gasoline Mini. This really surprised me. I mean, I knew it was going to be cheaper. I had no idea the saving would be that massive. I also noticed that this total cost for the electric Mini was $5,000 less than we would pay just to buy the gasoline version, never mind fuel it and maintain it. The potential savings there are all well and good. But you only have to look at YouTube comments on electric car videos to run into what I call the prophets of doom. People who say that everything may well be all sunshine and roses when the cars are new, but what happens when electric cars get older? Will anyone want your used, out-of-warranty EV years from now? I mean, aren't they like smartphones, worthless after 5 or 6 years as the technology improves? Or what if you want to keep the car longer than the battery warranty? When that battery fails and has to be replaced, it'll wipe out all these savings. Go with the gas car, they'll say. You know where you are with that, and any decent mechanic will always be able to fix it for you. Personally, I'd be more worried about the hundreds of moving parts in the gas car than I would about the battery or electric motor in an EV. But to be fair, I've also heard that the batteries are expensive to replace, so while I don't buy into this scaremongering, it would be wise to run the numbers against these scenarios to see how things might look if the worst happens. Hope for the best, but plan for the worst. So let's do that. We'll bring over the numbers from the last worksheet so we already know where we are financially after 8 years. Now, one piece of scaremongering I've come across several times is the idea that electric car technology is moving so fast that the value of an old EV is going to plummet, as within just a few years it'll look like a dinosaur. Personally, I think the gas car will be the one looking like a dinosaur in 2030. And the fact that better EVs will be available brand new 8 years from now hardly matters for those who can't afford a new car. There will always be a market for a used car that works. But let's take their concern literally, as in no one will buy our old electric Mini in 2030. It's worth nothing, not even $1 for all the parts that could be taken off it. Despite the fact it still works, no one wants it. So we take a working car to the junkyard and have them crush it. We get nothing. But the gasoline car, well, they were right. People still want those, and we would have gotten maybe $10,000 for ours, a full third of its value after 8 years and 80,000 miles. So we can take that $10,000 and put it in the bank. This means our electric Mini has actually cost us nearly $27,000 all in. But look, even with our $10,000 from the sale of the gasoline Mini, it still cost us over $35,000. So after junking our perfectly good electric car because it was worth $0, which of course no sane person would ever believe is a realistic possibility, we're still nearly $8,500 better off going with the electric car. So let's consider another scenario. We decide to keep the car longer, but just a few months out of warranty, the high-voltage battery fails completely. It had more than 70% life in it when the warranty ended, but now, instead of degrading slowly, it just died completely and the car is dead. To keep the car, we'd have to pay the Mini dealer a ton of money to replace the battery for us. We clearly should have bought the gasoline car, right? After all, the engine and transmission would never die. Okay, again, I don't think this is remotely realistic, but let's run the numbers. I actually don't know what a new battery costs for the Mini. I do know that Tesla charge about $20,000 to replace one in an old Model S. I also know that battery is about 3 times the size of the one in the Mini, and the bigger the battery, the more it costs. So how much do I imagine Mini might charge to fit a new one? Based on the $20,000 for a Tesla one, I suppose $10,000 is not out of the realms of possibility. But Mini belongs to BMW, which is German, and everything for them is more expensive than you might expect, so maybe $12,000. Also, Tesla sell a lot of cars and thus buy a lot of batteries, so they probably get a better price than BMW, who haven't sold that many electric Minis, or BMW i3s, which is where the electric Mini's drivetrain comes from. So if BMW have to pay more for their batteries, then we have to pay them more as well. So let's say $15,000. I doubt and certainly hope that it's not that high, but we're going with worst case scenario here, so we'll run with it. So now we have a brand new battery. We got 8 years out of the old one. Let's assume we get another 8 before the replacement has another unlikely total failure. So we need to add in the fuel cost over another 8 years. Then there's another 8 years of maintenance, but nothing except routine stuff. After all, that Mini's engine and transmission will make it to 16 years and 160,000 miles without needing anything, right? I mean, what could go wrong? So now, after 16 years and 160,000 miles of trouble-free motoring in our gasoline Mini, and a new $15,000 battery for its electric brother, how do the numbers look? $46,000 all in for the electric Mini, including that $15,000 battery replacement, but $61,000 for the reliability miracle that is the gasoline version. So we're still $15,000 better off buying the electric car, even if we have to replace the battery at a cost of $15,000. Now that I've allowed for 2 worst-case scenarios, I just can't see where it makes more financial sense to buy the gasoline version. Now that we've done the general comparisons between the 2 cars, I'm going to show you my personal worksheet. These are the numbers I actually used that persuaded me that the electric version was the way to go for us. I'm reworking everything based on Texas incentives, local gas prices, and what we actually pay for electricity, along with how much mileage we actually do. But when I did this, I wasn't considering the gasoline Mini Cooper S. The reason being that my wife just wanted a Mini. She doesn't care about the performance or features really. So I actually cross-shopped the electric Mini with a much cheaper base model car. The cheapest thing Mini sells with an automatic transmission, and that's $6,500 cheaper than that sportier Cooper S at $25,250, which is some $5,500 cheaper than the electric Mini. We're eligible for the full $7,500 federal tax rebate, so I added that in. Texas has a $2,500 state incentive, which we're also eligible for, so that goes in too. Due to the rebates and incentives, we're looking at less than $21,000 for the electric Mini versus over $25,000 for the absolute base model gasoline version. For the fuel economy figures, I went with the city cycle on the gas Mini, as that's the environment my wife will be using the car in, and I went with 5 miles per kilowatt hour for the electric version instead of 4, because my research leads me to believe that's entirely possible in city driving in a warm climate. Before you call foul, hold on a sec. You'll see that it doesn't actually matter what number I put here. The base model gas Mini still needs premium fuel, and while it's currently only $3.30 per gallon here, I'm taking a long view and I'm averaging out at $4.20 over the next 12 years, as I expect it's only going to go up. As for the electricity, well, we're on a plan where we pay nothing for our usage between 8 p.m. and 5 a.m. Yes, that means we pay more during the day than a simple flat rate plan, but don't worry, before we signed up, I'd already run the numbers based on our last 2 years of usage, and that showed we could save 25% by making the switch, despite the strong need for daytime AC in a Texas summer. I won't go into the details of how and why this works out for us. I might make another video on that topic, as essentially I'm using the house as a thermal battery. But just know that we signed up for this plan months before we had an electric car, and even without an EV, it saves us money. Adding charging of 2 EVs into the mix, we're saving even more, and yes, the cost of charging really is zero for us. Now, I don't expect these plans to go away, and we're locked in for another couple of years anyway, but when we move house, we're planning on getting solar, so even if the plan does go away, we'll still be paying $0 to charge the cars. Over 60,000 miles, which is what I expect my wife will do in 12 years, we're saving over $8,500 in fuel. I pulled the numbers for regular maintenance, except in this case worked out over 12 years. I don't expect the brake cost to be any worse than the 8-year comparison as the mileage is lower, so that stays the same. And the plugs and belts still need doing, as I'd probably replace them after 10 years regardless of the mileage. As this is my personal worksheet, I'm not trying to give the gas car some misguided advantage, I'm trying to be realistic. So I don't believe it will make it 12 years without something failing in the drivetrain, whether it's a fuel pump, leaky hoses, a starter motor, or whatever. I also wouldn't take the car to a dealer to be worked on. I'd find someone local who knows minis, but even then, bills mount up easily on these cars, so I'm going to say $4,000 of extra maintenance there. I'm not counting the suspension or wheel bearings or a failed electric window or whatever, as the same would apply to the electric car. Again, I'm just highlighting the differences here. This puts us at $1,500 of maintenance on the electric version versus nearly $9,000 on the gas car. So our grand total over 12 years and 60,000 miles is a difference of nearly $20,000. That's just insane to me. I really didn't expect that. And much like the doomsday scenarios we looked at, if no one wants to buy the EV from us, or I have to put a battery in it at any time at huge expense, it just doesn't matter. The difference is just so huge, we can't really lose going with the EV over the gas car. Doing these worksheets silenced any final reservations I had about going for the electric over the gasoline. Again, this is because I already knew the range was fine for my wife's needs, plus we have another car for long trips anyway. So we ordered a 2022 Mini Cooper SE back in the last week of August 2021, and it was delivered the last day of November 2021. My wife was thrilled to have her cool Mini, and frankly, I drive it every chance I can get as well.